D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello Gamer Nation and welcome to the Dice Ball podcast covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play a game in the Genesys Role Playing Game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host GM Hurley, and as you can imagine, running a podcast by myself would be just a little bit daunting, if not as boring as hell for you the listener. So I've brought with me three amazingly wonderful people who I have the pleasure of gaming with on a weekly basis, and in my opinion are some of the best gaming minds that I know. Hence the reason why we've assembled them. Anyway, so without further ado, I'm honoured to introduce you to my co-hosts and friends, GM Huz, better known as Michael, GM Flano, also known as Martin, and GM Caitlin, also known as Caitlin. Welcome to the podcast, guys. How are we all this evening?
I'm doing well, Ian. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. I've had a coffee, you know.
And Caitlin?
I'm doing well also.
Fantastic. All right, so let's get this show on the road. We've had a great response so far from what we've posted up online on our Facebook page, so people are pretty keen to hear what we have to say. So firstly, I think we should probably introduce ourselves so that people have an idea of who they're going to be talking to, or listening to, should I say. So we'll start around the table. Mike?
Yep, well, I'm GM Huz. You'll see my name on Facebook, popping up fairly often. Basically, I've been playing various tabletop games for most of my life now, since I was a teenager, starting off with Warhammer 40,000 and basically climbing the ladder from there on in, starting with D&D, like probably a lot of people my age, as my first role-playing game adventure. Then sort of progressed to where I am today, where I'm playing almost everything. These days, mostly FFG's narrative dice system in the shape of Star Wars. So yeah, I bring a lot of gaming knowledge purely from years of doing it.
All good. Martin?
Well, I'm GM Flano, and no, I don't really wear that many flannelette shirts.
That was a question that was asked on the Facebook page, I think. But anyway.
Yeah.
He's wearing flannel pants right now.
Flannelette everything.
Wow. You should see it.
Don't.
But I've been role-playing pretty much everything, from systems that we've made ourselves to Vampire the Masquerade and the rest of the World of Darkness to Star Wars in all of its various incarnations for well over a decade now. And, you know, I absolutely love it. It's one of my great passions in life, and I want to share that with everyone. That's why I'm here.
Cool. Caitlin.
Hello, everyone. So I'm the newest player in terms of the tabletop role-playing game in comparison to my other co-hosts here. I've always loved role-playing systems, and most games that I've tended to picked up and played has always had those types of elements in them. I've always been drifted towards games that I was allowed to take on characters and go into journeys and do different worlds. So naturally, role-playing games was the next step for me, and I took that step about 2 years ago. And I've just loved the journey that that the Star Wars RPG books has been able to give me, and I'm super excited for Genesys to be able to see all the different worlds that I can travel in there now.
Awesome. Cool. Well, my name's Ian. I'm also better known probably to the gaming community as GM Hurley. I've been involved in games since the early 80s when I was first introduced to Top Secret of all games. I ended up playing a lot of games and started into the Star Wars role-playing game back in when it was D6, and I've probably followed that all the way through. Played some Pathfinder during my time, but graduated to the narrative dice system by Fantasy Flight Games with Star Wars after being a little bit reluctant initially, but fell in love with that. And as soon as they announced Genesys, I was very excited to have the opportunity to play in other areas other than Star Wars, which is part of my fandom, still using this great system that I think we've all grown to love. Hence the reason why we're here today on the podcast to discuss this system.
I think it's fair to say that we all have an extreme passion for role-playing games.
Oh, look, I would agree with that.
Definitely.
All right, so let's discuss very quickly so that we can get into the main part of the show. But why are we all excited to be involved, A, in the podcast, and B, in the Genesys system generally?
Well, I'm firstly super excited about Genesys because it allows me to think of different games and different systems and different worlds and different themes that can be brought into the role-playing game around the table without actually being constricted to one particular style of game. So say Star Wars, for example. Genesys allows you to pick up any different type of franchise or different theme that you want to play in and allows you to create that universe, even if it's a universe that you've created yourself. So I'm really excited to see how that's going to play out and the rules and the systems to enable that. I know that we're going to be talking a little bit later about some of the themes that we're keen on playing in, and that just goes to show how Genesys can go across all these different types of platforms. And I think that's really exciting. And I'm really excited to be a part of that and trying to get new players in and, you know, support people that it's not as scary to start joining a new team or a new group, and that it's not as hard to start entering into that universe, particularly with something as on the ground as Genesys can be.
Absolutely. Mike?
I think Caitlin makes a fair few good points there about why all of us are excited in general about Genesys, because it does open up a whole new sandbox for us to play our favourite games in. Either that's original worlds we create or using pre-existing worlds from our favourite franchises like comics or movies or books or wherever. I know for myself what I'm most excited for about Genesys is the fact that it is a book that is purely made to support rules created by the players. The whole book is designed with that in perspective from the ground up. And as a person who really gets into developing rules, to me it's heaven to get a book that's made for people like myself, which is great.
Martin?
What I'm most excited, and you both make excellent points, but what I'm most excited to see from this system is what the narrative dice bring to each of those settings, because it's done amazing things with the Star Wars setting and our own games.
Yeah.
The moments that have been created by that are impressive. Great memories, and I want to see that applied to other worlds and other settings like The Fifth Element, and Blade Runner.
Yeah,
so much.
I want to see that. That's what I'm here for.
And I think that's the key, and that's the thing that I'm excited about probably just as much. Is the narrative dice system is what drives this system. It's what is at the core of it. And just the stories that not only the GM can tell, like with a lot of classic role-playing games, it's moving the narrative back into the player's hands as well. Absolutely. So that you're telling a group, you're telling a collective story. And I think that's the difference between the narrative dice system and, as I said, the more classic things, the more classic role-playing games, where you have a lot more of the responsibility of the story and the direction that things move is more the GM, where in this it's in the player's hands, it's in their control, which is what I love.
It takes away the whole daunting GM crunch that a lot of traditional RPG systems bring with it.
Agreed.
And it makes the GM as much a player as the other people around the table.
Absolutely. And I know this is probably a completely new topic all again, and we'll no doubt
we'll come back to
it at a different stage. But just as far as the GM goes, prep time so much easier in this game. As long as you've got the setting down pat, you don't really have much to do other than have a bit of an idea of where your story is going to go, and the rest of it is just you play along with the players. And, it's great.
I type a page of notes or page or two.
Yep.
And basically that's enough to fuel 1, 2, or even 3 sessions, depending on where the players take the story.
Exactly. All right, so I suppose what the listeners want to know is, what is this podcast going to be about? So what do each of us think is at the core of, I mean, we've talked about the core of what the setting is. Well, let's talk about what is the core of this podcast. Martin?
Over to me. Well, I think that this podcast is, it's primarily about Genesys, but it's about how we can help you as players engage with this system and bring your ideas and dreams to life around the table.
Love it. Would you agree, Caitlin?
Oh, definitely would agree. Being someone who is new to the role-playing world as myself, I don't have all of the rules, and being able to cross-compare as well as my other hosts here or everyone else in this world. But part of what I would like to bring to this podcast is being able to look at those rules and look at them through the eyes of a new player, and hopefully try and explain them in a way that entices new players to pick up that dice and give it a go, and also make it not seem as intimidating as maybe the rules might necessarily make it out to be. Also give different ideas and different perspectives about how the game can be played, or how systems can be worked in with the Genesys system. So I'm hoping to create and support a podcast that'll help new players, old players, prospective players, anyone trying to make those stories come to life for them and their players, and
to jump in the pool, so to speak.
In the deep end.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, let's move away from the pool analogy, shall we? All right, Mike, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think Martin and Caitlin have gave a pretty good summary so far, but I know I mentioned before, as a guy who has an interest in developing rules and expanding upon rules and introducing new rules and whatnot like that to a game. I know the game isn't all about rules, but still, as an RPG, rules are the backbone to the game. And you can play rules light or rules heavy. Regardless, rules are still there. So I like to demonstrate and take advantage of using Genesys and our podcast to show players and GMs alike that they're not restricted to a book when it comes to creating their worlds. So they should feel free to do what they want to do, create what they want, and implement it into their game. Let that be talents, skills, archetypes, rules for settings, you name it. This book introduces all the tools the player and the GM as a whole needs to do that. And I think a lot of people need a little bit of a push into that world of knowing that they can create stuff. They don't have to wait until a publisher like FFG or whoever officially releases something. Because there's so much fan content out there on the internet that you can harvest and bring to your own games. You don't even have to make up rules. You can Google something and sure enough, you'll find something and bring it to your game. Yeah. It's a open world.
Look, I think that's true of this system generally, especially, I mean, it's only been released for what? At the time of this podcast, it's only been like less than a week since it's first been released.
Well, some people haven't got their copies yet.
No, exactly. It's like it's still moving across the slow boat across the ocean. I know that a lot of the people in the UK still don't have theirs yet. For me, the part that excites me is not just the system itself, because I'm a firm believer, having been in the camp of I'm not going down the path of buying new dice. I'm sort of set in my ways with like when I was playing Star Wars Saga, that's the last system that I'm ever going to go and buy.
Star Wars Saga was the, D20 Star Wars?
Yeah, it was D20 Star Wars.
The Dark Ages?
So as soon as the system came out, I was sort of, no, I'm not going to go there. But as soon as I actually got to experience what it was like, I'm just going, right, I love this. Because it's exactly what I like to do as a GM, is to tell a good story. I prefer story over crunch any day. But the part that excites me the most out of this entire process of being involved in the podcast is that we're bringing our collective consciousness together, because we've got great experiences as GMs and as players that we can then share that and hopefully make a better experience for the listeners and for people who, as Caitlin said, the people who have never played this game, for the people who have played Star Wars. for the people who've played, other role-playing systems that want to try something new. I'm really excited about sharing that from our perspectives. Whether it be right or wrong in the overall look of things, it's our perspective.
Yeah.
And hopefully people will be able to get some ideas out of that and maybe sort of open discussions with other things that can help people along the way.
Essentially, we are Voltron of the narrative dice.
Which I think somebody else suggested that setting. But anyway, we'll talk about settings later on.
But it's also really great that we have all of the GMs around the table here all have a very different level of experience and interest in this field. So you've got people who are very, very knowledgeable about the rules that are able to provide that information to people who are much more crunchy and want to know that, as well as the support and the narrative. So it's really got a nice crossover of everything that you could possibly want to know about Genesys. We can provide that advice from our perspective and how to game as well. We've got that cross-section.
Absolutely. So I think it's time to discuss what's going on out there in the wide blue yonder. Should we say what's on the radar? On the radar. So welcome to On the Radar, the segment where we will discuss the latest and greatest on the internet concerning the Genesys role-playing game and any other amazing discoveries that we feel may be of interest to our listeners. Firstly, the FFG forums, they are absolutely ablaze with information about what's going on. There's a lot of people that are talking about different settings. So anybody else seen anything on the internet about what's going on?
Well, as everyone knows, Genesys is only just out. So just like the Star Wars RPG system that Fantasy Flight does, that Genesys is based on, you will need special dice to play the game. Now, the dice are available from the FFG store, and most places you can buy the game from, your online stores and etc. The dice are more or less the same as the Star Wars dice, except they have some slightly different symbols, so Lucasfilm doesn't sue them.
Or something like that.
But if you're lucky enough to have a large Star Wars dice, you don't really need to buy any more, unless you're a bit of a freak for collecting new stuff.
Like me.
Yeah, I'm not about that life. I got the new dice myself.
Let's face it, we all bought dice.
No.
Oh, actually, no. Mike
I'm
didn't.
content with my mini Star Wars dice.
Mike didn't buy new dice.
I didn't.
Shun the non-believer.
Dingy.
I know. Anyway, so you pick those dice up. They retail for the same price as the Star Wars dice, so you'll be paying the same amount either way. And like anything FFG, they're great quality.
They are.
How many dice would you need to play, you reckon, realistically? 3 sets?
With the new set, I believe that
Probably only two.
Two sets were recommended within the Genesys book.
Okay.
because there's 2 red dice as opposed to the Star Wars versions, which only had 1 red dice.
Because
But
they
it
also
also had
had-
a star. It also had the 4 stars.
4 stack.
Well, turns out I should have bought new dice then.
Yeah, it looks
But-
like.
But yes, 2 sets is what they recommend. I bought 3 because I'm just a gaming whore, really.
But you can get the Dice Roller app.
Can get the Dice Roller app for those who like to roll the dice electronically, which is weird, but, no judgment.
It's not my style.
Dice Roller app is available off, iTunes or Android Google Play Store. Retails for about $10.
I think it's $7.99 or something like that.
It depends
right?
what country you're from,
Yeah,
I guess,
exactly
as well.
right. Yeah,
But it's a
exactly
lot it's a lot cheaper than the dice, but you do sacrifice that awesome real dice feeling. But it's a good alternative.
Especially if you're wanting to just try the system first without
true.
Yeah.
going and making a lot of investment. I think that's one way.
Well, the electronic dice roll is also really good if you're playing, say, a group of guys who've never played before.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can just chuck the dice down on one shared tablet, and they can then just roll the dice on that one
Yeah,
shared tablet. And
exactly.
the benefit of the dice roller is you can set it so it automatically calculates your net result, so you don't have to worry about cancelling dice out and whatnot, which some of us more veteran players prefer, but for new players, the automatic cancellation of results can speed up the game a fair bit until they're a little bit more savvy with how the dice mechanics work.
Yeah.
Plus, it also helps if you want to start playing straight away and the dice is currently sold out.
Well, this is true.
Yeah.
Another alternative.
That is true.
No excuses, basically.
Because I know that the Star Wars ones were very, very hard to come across. They became as rare as hen's teeth. So I think that FFG have learnt their lesson a little bit here, because there seems to be a lot of people posting online about their dice hoards that they have. There was one person who bought like 5 sets of dice. I think he might have been buying dice for all of his players, but anyway, that's a side note. And what else is there?
Well, handily enough, Fantasy Flight Games have put out several PDFs of things that you can use for the system. Whilst there may be a character sheet and other things in the book, it's much easier if you can print out your own. So on their website, they've got a PDF of the character sheet, a campaign sheet to help you organize, what's going on around the table, and a module, which is something that we have done a live play of.
Yes, we have, which is available for download, is it not?
Yeah, on iTunes, and if there's other ways that you'd like to download it, it's all detailed on our Facebook.
Exactly right. So for people who have RSS feeds and things like that, we've put up all of those links. No doubt we will have and find other ways to do that through Google Play and things like that, but that'll be later on down the track.
Quick note, Martin. The module, that's
Runebound.
Runebound.
So for those Runebound fans, it's ready to go. So
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
The only thing I have to mention about that is that there aren't any pre-generated characters to play in. So, which is quite interesting. Now, we were lucky enough to actually have the full version given to us by FFG to run, and we had 4 of the pre-gen characters, which was all from Gen Con. But unfortunately, they may change this later on down the track, but I think that they've got some abilities in there that aren't actually in the book.
Okay.
But you can certainly find printouts of that online in different sources if you just go looking for those character sheets, and you'll see what the differences are.
Well, fortunately enough, it's pretty simple to build a character in this Genesis system.
Absolutely.
So maybe scrap going pre-builds and get the pen and paper out and make some own characters.
Indeed.
And I'd like to point out that the live play is an excellent example of play for this system.
But the other thing as well is that we spent a little bit of time, especially with our friend Madeline, who joined us since we're a podcast of 4, she joined us as a 5th member of our cohort to help play, and she'd never played any role-playing games before, so it was interesting to get her perspective as well. And she played Ula, the Dwarven Alchemist, which there's a part in part 2, which you'll have to learn about in a couple of weeks' time, which is absolutely hilarious. But that's a side note altogether. But yeah, so we actually go through in that podcast where we talk about, in the live play, it's where we talk about the whole rules and what's involved. So we're kind of stepping a new player through it. So if you've never ever played this system before, it's probably a good opportunity to listen to how it's all put together.
Well, I believe speaking of new players, I believe a very nice gentleman left a 5-star review on our iTunes page describing just that he's walking his 5th ed D&D players through the live play so they get a bit of a sample of how the Genesis system works.
That's cool. That's awesome.
So one life already changed. Lives.
Makes you feel good.
It does. And that's ultimately what we're all about. So what else is out there in the interwebs, my friends?
Not only is FFG a buzz with information about the Genesis system, but so is our Facebook for the Dice Pool podcast. If you would like to stay up to date with information about the Genesis system, the Facebook is the perfect place to interact with our GMs, ask questions, and also engage in general conversation about the Genesis system and the game and universes available to it. So not only are we fully active on our Facebook page, but GM Huz has also created a blog that gives more information and tidbits about the Genesis system, vehicles, settings, different ideas that you can employ into your games with Genesis.
And it's been very, very popular.
Surprisingly so. I didn't even intend it to be. I just did something to fill the time, but it seems to be pretty popular. So I will keep the blogs continuing.
Absolutely.
And what are we calling that?
I think we're calling that the mic stand because we're all about puns.
I won't stand against that.
I see what you did there.
Stay up to date by following the Dice Pool Podcast on Facebook and Twitter by searching for @DicePool for information about upcoming episodes and to stay up to date with the hosts on a regular basis. Please feel free to also follow us on our website at www.thedicepoolpodcast.com.
Awesome. And they can also get in contact with us if they want to by sending us an email if they want to go back through that archaic method of
Electronic mail.
Electronic mail by sending us an email to info@thedicepoolpodcast.com.
That is it.
Wait, who's info?
Info's the fifth host.
Wow.
He's very quiet.
Yeah. Again, assuming it's a he. Did you just assume?
Wow. All right. Should we move on? All right. So now we should get to the main part of the show, which we're calling the core of the show. Core of the show. So welcome to Core of the Show, the main topic of discussion for this episode, where we will take a deep dive into a topic concerning game mastering and playing in the Genesys Role Playing Game, and of course, gaming in general. All right, so what we're going to talk about today, just as a bit of a general banter, I guess, because that's kind of what people are asking for, to look at our initial impressions of the game since it's been out for a week or so. I know that it's come with me to work every single day this week since I purchased it, which we can actually thank Military Simulations, which is a game shop in Melbourne, who we initially would have had to have waited quite some time because there was a bit of a delay in getting it to Australia, but they were gracious enough to get it to us as soon as possible. So when it was on the release date, we managed to have it in our hot little hands, which is great.
They fixed us up. They did a good job.
They did indeed.
Fantastic.
So
Good
what's our initial impressions of the book so far?
Well, I know I absolutely love it. From an aesthetic perspective, I like to start there because I'm a big collector of books. I have a shelf full of hardcover books, like most role players out there. So as soon as I got this book, I fell in love with just how it looked. I love that clean, crisp, white, sort of minimalistic sort of tone it's got all the way through it. And it sort of lends itself to the fact it's not tying itself to any one sort of setting, and having its sort of white, crisp pages gives it that sort of go anywhere with it sort of feel, and I think that's great. And not to mention, it has a fantastic new book smell.
Oh my
and
God.
I will point out that it smells exactly like the D&D 5th edition rulebook.
Really?
A one-for-one smell.
Wow.
Can confirm.
Confirm on smell. Excellent. That should be part of a review.
Right.
I think that's the next article for the
Ooh,
mic
the
mic
stand.
stand.
It is. Book
Yeah.
smells.
Book smells.
smell.
Rated 1 to 5.
If they had a book smell cologne.
Yeah.
I'm sure they do,
Yeah.
actually.
You could so bottle that. You could.
Yeah,
I
you
know
could.
that I would just have it on the shelf and just
Air freshener for your home.
Yeah.
wow.
Along with new electronic smell, like, done.
New car smell, I think, is overrated.
No.
I agree.
New
It's so
electronics,
done.
new books, new games.
It's so 1990. Anyway, that's how you kill a conversation. Right, moving along. So,
By talking about my birth year.
Well,
I just made everyone in this room feel super awkward. And it's
And
fantastic.
super old.
and super.
super old.
Especially this guy.
Thanks very much. Yes,
No one can see who you're pointing to.
it's Mike points
Everyone
to
knows.
me. Yes. It's all good. So yes. So initial impressions, pretty happy with the way that it looks.
Martin, what do you think?
I think it's great. My initial impression is that it seems to have everything in it that you need. It's all there. At the back, you've got a whole bunch of optional rules that just seem to cover everything. I haven't found something that I've wanted to be there that isn't. And I think that's really important for what they're going for. In this core book, you've got the key building blocks for every setting imaginable.
Caitlin.
From my perspective, when I very first got it, the first thing I did was look at the art. So we're looking at, aesthetics. I've always been a huge fan of the art that FFG puts into their books, and I was equally just as thrilled when I saw all the artwork through it and really bringing some of that to life. But one of the things about so the first thing, as soon as I opened up the book, was, other than looking at all the pretty pictures, was going straight to that toolkit and that world builder kit and actually having a look at that. That was my key thing and wanting to see how that worked. And from my first impression, I was so excited to see how it steps you through it in such an easy way. And it led me to become even more excited about what's going to happen next, even after this book. So it's gotten me excited for this one, but then also what is possible and what's going to come next from FFG.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I know as soon as I had that book in my hand, that brain just overfloated with like what to do with this amazing thing.
And
Ideas.
I think that's
so many.
I think that's the main sort of feedback that has come from. You just got to look at the FFG boards, and even on our own Facebook page, just the number of sort of settings that people have gone, well, we can do this, we can do that, and that's what is so exciting about this, because they've had so much fun, I think, with Star Wars. That they've gone, the possibilities are endless, especially with this narrative dice feel. That it just opens up all of those possibilities more so than ever before that I've seen anyway.
They've tasted what they can do with the dice through playing Star Wars. They know those same epic moments and feels and story-driven moments that come from the dice can now be translated freely to any setting that you can think of, and that's the most exciting thing, if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Them Star Wars RPG feels and everything, which is going to be great.
One of the things as well, when we got this book, first impressions was I was actually helping. We were all helping Martin move house at the time. And when Martin needed someone to stay around back at the house, I gladly volunteered because that gave me extra time to go through that book and have a look while everyone else did heavy lifting. I was so excited for this book, and I can only imagine anyone else who picks it up is going to be just as excited.
Absolutely. I'm just going to touch base on the artwork that you mentioned before. The thing which I like about it, and I think it's just the style of the artwork, is that it's incomplete.
Yeah.
And that says exactly what this book is about right from the get-go.
Well, not to say the book's incomplete.
No. But just
The artwork has the blueprint.
The artwork has sort of, is that blueprint feel, but it also sort of fills in the gaps, kind of giving the reader the impression that they can fill in the rest.
It's very cleverly done.
Yeah. So,
Even though that front cover, the front cover is amazing. I love how you have, in the foreground, you have a tiny little village and a windmill. Then it slowly unfolds out to a big giant castle keep that goes to a cyberpunk dystopian looking city.
Yeah.
And as the picture draws out further and further in distance, it becomes more and more of that unfinished blueprint sort of feel.
Absolutely.
Giving you, when you're looking at this front cover, it gives you the sense of you're looking at infinite possibilities.
Yeah.
Worlds without end.
Exactly. And that's just so cool. I love it. And that's just the artwork.
And we can talk about artwork forever. But FFG have always done really, really well with their artwork. You look at Star Wars and the quality of the books. I know that there used to be a lot of complaints with Star Wars about how expensive the books are. But you look at the quality of that in comparison to other systems and in days gone past, some of the other games that have been released where it was just all black and white. And you look at the quality, they put so much care, and the artists are just amazing. And they've certainly not spared any expense, I think, with this book, which is a testament to them.
Could you imagine the reaction that someone would have 20 years ago if you took one of these books back in the past and that's all the quality?
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a game in that. Anyway,
Shit.
yes, time travel. I so want to run that game.
There is one cheeky thing I'll point out about this book, and it's probably something that would be overlooked, is its cost. It's actually very, very cheap for a thick hardcover book. It's very approachable for almost anyone, and that's what blew me away was the cost. I'm like, wow, that's really cheap.
When I first bought the Edge of the Empire book, it was in Australian dollars. This is going
Dollary
back.
dues.
Indeed, that it was like almost, I think it was $90 to $100 for the book.
It still is.
Really?
Yeah, $110. I think some places charge for a
that's
cool book
insane.
over here. Sorry, $110 dues.
We've got to have the Australianisms in there somewhere. But how much was this? It was like $62 or something like that.
62, 65.
Somebody I saw had it in Australian dollars. For $55.
Wow. Well, I know it retails for 50 on 50 US.
Wow.
No, 40 US.
40 US?
FFG site.
That's great.
great entry
That's
point.
amazing. So, as far as the crunch, actually, let's take a step back. What was the first thing you went looking for in this book?
Well, I think Caitlin, you looked at what was the first thing?
So I looked at the Gamemaster Toolkit,
Yeah.
which looked at how you can create your own species, how you can create your own worlds, how you can create your own talents, which I am super excited for, particularly because when you're looking at all the different systems, that really enables you to do some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing I opened up and wanted to have a look at, and to see how they basically recommend doing that, because it's something that I've always wanted to do.
Yep.
I've tried to do that as best I can in some of the games that I have, but it's always really hard without having that step-by-step guide. So that was the first thing. Well, as soon as other than looking at pictures, was going to having a look at that toolkit.
Absolutely. Martin?
I flipped from page to page and I jumped back and forwards. First thing I looked at, though, was the archetypes, the species, that sort of thing. But I'm also really excited to see and get further into the magic system, because that's pretty central to a lot of worlds.
Yeah, absolutely.
that I'd like to build.
Especially when you start looking at like your fantasy settings and even sort of your modern day things like Shadowrun and things like that. But I think that the magic setting is quite unique in comparison to other systems, because it's completely based around skills, which is the same sort of. It's great. Love it. It's a Mike.
Well, I sort of cracked it open in the middle and just started reading bits and pieces. But I think the first thing I moved towards was the talent system, because I wanted to see how they handled talents without trees that Star Wars so heavily relies upon.
Yep.
And I love the Star Wars trees with the various careers and specializations. I think that's a great thing. But I also love the endless combinations of things you can do in regards to talents in this book. The talents have a tier structure, but apart from that, there's no restriction on what talents you can take. So you can make almost any character you want with any set of talents you like, and the possibilities are endless. And when they obviously will do future expansions, there'll be more talents added to the mix. So the characters you can create are just going to be endless. And I think any player worth their weight in XP will just go crazy over the fact they can just make that dream character. And that's so cool.
Because I think that's kind of, I mean, we all would agree that we all love the Star Wars system.
Yeah.
But it does, you can feel sometimes a little bit restricted as to what you can do and what you can choose. Or you have to go and spend extra XP to go across to a different career. And they're very themed and they're great, but at the same time,
it's double-edged sword.
Yeah, and this sort of takes it to the next level and says, look, you can basically do whatever you want as far as the sort of talents and skills and things like that. So I think that's something which is a positive, a big positive with this book.
You can finally make that diplomatic marauder who has high tea at noon and is chopping someone's head off in the afternoon.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what I found that I went to in the book first. I went looking for what's different. So I poured through the different bits and pieces, but I wanted to see how they were going to handle character generation, what was different about the way that they did that in comparison to Star Wars, because, I've fallen in love so much with Star Wars that I wanted to see how this was different. And I found that there are quite some interesting changes that they've made, talents being one of them, but just the different skills that they've used as well. Like operator is a new skill, which is quite interesting. It's sort of using for larger scale starship combat, stuff like that. But also the way that they did the sort of the dual use of your divine and your arcana or whatever it's called, as well as your primal, for which are used for your spells, but they're also used for knowing more about that sort of area. So I think that I was just keen to see what the differences were, and I was quite surprised that they made some interesting changes, especially with vehicle combat as well, which is some of the stuff that you've mentioned on the blog.
On Mike's stand?
On the mic stand. I found the changes to be quite refreshing.
That's great.
But yeah.
Well, also you bring up a character creation. I think a large thing that's changed is those who are used to Star Wars, they've done away with obligation, morality, and duty. There's none of that in this because obviously that's going to be tied to a setting.
Yep.
So all that's gone. But they have a really, really great motivation system now. Where you roll. Is it 4 tables?
It's four different tables. Yeah, absolutely. There's like floors. I can't remember them. It's too fresh.
We have books in front of us.
Luckily we do.
Blessed with books. Let me quickly flip to the page. So we have, as one of the last steps of creating a character, you determine your character motivation. Now, we're used to motivations in the Star Wars system being more or less one thing.
One thing, yeah.
Yeah, but in Genesis, it uses multiple tables. You can either randomly roll to see what your motivations are across those tables, or, of course, you can pick. The first table is your character's desires. The second table is your character's fears. The third table is your character's strengths. And the fourth and final table is your character's flaws. Now, there's a stack of different ones on each table. And if you choose to randomly roll, you can create a character that has an amazing set of background personality. And that will define your character with those 4 tables. And they'll really help you shape your character as you play.
The other thing as well that I think that will tie nicely into is, as a GM, when you're running NPCs that you suddenly just have thrown at you during a game, you can suddenly just go, give me 5 minutes, and quickly roll up a very snappy sort of motivations of that particular character, which if you go further on down the track in the book, and this is the other thing that I was really excited about, was social combat or social encounters. Because it was something that hasn't really been, it's been covered in some of the other supplements, but it's not actually in the core, and I think that's something which is really important.
It is a core mechanic.
It is a core mechanic, yeah. And so when you can start going into social encounters and then learn their motivations, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So, yeah, that's what I love that too. So
supports character development, not only just in creating your character, but as the character is put in the situations that the adventure holds for them. So your character might start off as something when you create it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their motivations or even their fears or anything like that might stay the same from character gen to the end of the campaign.
Well, that's it. And the rules do support changing motivations because people change.
Yep.
Pro tip, though, on a quick side note, for any GM, get a printout of those motivation tables. Have them sitting with your GM screen or wherever you happen to roll your dice and etc. Just so if you do need to make that important NPC on the fly, those tables are there ready to go. And you don't have to book dive. You just go bam, 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 and you've rolled up. There's your NPC.
What did we most like about the system, do we think, so far?
I love the narrative dice system.
Yep.
That is what hooked me in to Star Wars RPG. It's what's kept me going and is what's kept me coming back. Is that story.
Yep. I think it's a pretty fair point for everyone, to be honest. That's why we all play the game.
Yep.
Which is great.
I agree.
And it just feels like you can actually do all the different things that you can see in these amazing TV movies, and all these amazing TV shows or movies that you have, and you can tell it yourself and you can act it out. And it's really not so much about limited in terms of the rules of the game, but only really limited in the imagination that you have. I mean, the dice might tell you if you succeed or not, but the narrative dice system adds different elements to it that you might not necessarily have thought of, and it can change everything completely. And I love that about this system, that you don't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen when you walk into it.
It's really good at giving you those movie moments.
Exactly, yes.
Which you can achieve with any RPG, but this one gives you the structure to do it easily and all the time.
It really excels at it.
Excels at it, exactly.
Absolutely. Well, I would agree. I think the narrative dice system is what sells this game, as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, it is the core of what it is. But it's a very simple mechanic. And I tell you what, if I can teach my 14-year-old to how to play this game in a matter of minutes. And you can do this to anyone. It's not just kids, but you can simply show this. And we proved that with Madeline, is that within 30 minutes or so, she got the system. She understood what was going on.
Well, I ran a fantasy game using the narrative dice for my family, who've never role played at all before, and they've always thought that I was this weird person who did it all the time. But I ran a fantasy setting of my creation, fairly generic fantasy setting, using Star Wars dice system. This was before Genesis was out, and within 2 sessions, they were completely hooked. They understood how the dice worked, and they keep coming back and asking me when I'm going to run another game for them.
Wow.
And these are a bunch of people who have never role played in their life, and they've always just thought it was this weird nerd culture thing. But they all love it now, and thanks to the narrative dice.
Absolutely.
Because they're not stuck behind a boring number crunch.
Yeah, true.
And for someone who's not great at maths, it's fantastic. I no longer feel anxiety every time I have to do a dice roll because I know I'm going to have to do some kind of equation that's going to embarrass me in front of everyone.
Exactly right. And that's something else that I think that they've changed with the system as well. If you start looking at some of the formulas in inverted commas that they've had in Star Wars, they have smoothed out some of those things. Which is quite interesting. Again, it goes down to some of the changes that they made with vehicle combat, which has made a massive difference, I think.
They're small changes, but they're just logical changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And they've done a really good job of just making the system a lot more flexible around all of this.
Well, I know my favorite part of the book is probably not what's in the book. To be honest, it's basically what allows you. It gives you the motivation to build your own world, and which is great. And that's something that's not in the well. It's in the book. The tools to build your own world are in the book, but most of that's going to come from you. So oddly enough, it's the thing that's not in the book, which is my favorite thing.
Wow, that's a good point. That's a good point.
That was beautiful.
I'm touched.
It was a love letter.
To FFG.
How about
Thank you for
Martin?
letting me believe.
What's your favorite thing, Martin?
Is how flexible the system is.
Yeah.
Because they've, as I say, they've done a really good job of moving away from the rigidity of Star Wars and bringing it to life as this new thing that
It does.
it's a good framework for whatever you want to build.
Agreed.
Excellent.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. So let's be salespeople for a moment. There are other.
Is there a commission?
There is not.
Then I'm
But
out.
we are trying to sell people to come and listen to us, Mike.
Then I'm in.
Right. All right. So let's examine for a moment, because there are other generic systems which are out there. They may not necessarily be tied to an open source like there is for the. I can't remember what they call it, the 2D20 system that they use for Conan and Star Trek and Infinity and things like that.
That's Modificus system.
Yes.
And that's not open source. That's their own.
Yeah. So I guess what is it about this system that is the selling point, or why should people look at this system perhaps above anything else?
You mean besides the new book smell?
Yeah. Or besides the new book smell. Yeah.
I think again, it's the ease of access that this game brings. You can as a GM from multiple angles. As a GM, it's so easy to set up a game and run it with little preparation.
Yep.
Building a world, you can be as deep as you like with that, but then again, you can be fairly light with it as well, as long as you have an idea of what you want to do. And the ease of access for players, you can be a new player or a veteran player and still have the same amount of enjoyment. There's no number crunch that a lot of other systems have. There's no hardcore rules crunch either. Basically, you roll your dice, and usually that's all you need to know. Roll your dice, work out a result, and you and the storyteller work out what happens from there on in. And that is the biggest appeal, because you're not just rolling a dice and going, I rolled a 5, and that's it. The story always continues, no matter what you roll.
Yep.
And so if you're a new player who has to worry about that number crunch roll, there's always excitement. You're never just sitting there bored. And I think that is one of the biggest selling points to Genesis for a generic system.
Yeah. Because you've got other generic systems like GURPS, I guess D20,
Fate.
Fate, is another one.
And they're all good systems.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
Great systems. They're not bad systems.
We're not system elitists. Or
No, I have
anything
a
like
bookshelf of systems, and so does Ian, and probably
Yeah,
Martin
absolutely.
as well.
Yeah.
And Caitlin, get some systems on your show.
I don't know. I'm pretty hooked on this narrative system now. So
And what's got you hooked?
Giant hooks.
quite literally. I have played another systems before, more of the traditional RPG style of game. But I just found when I very first picked up the dice for Star Wars RPG and started actually playing with that narrative system, and it just enabled a freedom I didn't have when playing those traditional games. I always felt that there was whatever I wanted to do, I couldn't actually do narratively because the rules didn't allow me to do that action. Or I couldn't do certain things to enable what I had in my head exactly play out how I wanted it to. So when I picked up that narrative dice system and transitioned from a D20 to or a binary dice system into something like this, I found myself able to describe exactly what I wanted my character to do, looking at the environment that's around it or the other players that are there, and create a scene within a narrative and my character having control over that scene. Or if I'm behind the screen, being a GM and being able to create the worlds and putting people in them and in these difficult situations. And having the narrative dice system enabled everyone to be a part of that story and creating that scene with me as a player or as a GM. So in terms of transitioning into Genesys, I think that's one of the biggest selling points is that you can actually use this for whatever it is that you want. I know a few of the campaigns that I personally want to run with this is not something that probably anyone would create into an RPG if it weren't for Genesys and allowing that to take place. Even if it's, the world that I have inside of my own head of the multiple ones that are currently running all the time, it wouldn't happen without something like that. So it's great for people who maybe want to try some of their traditional games in using the narrative dice system. So perhaps even giving, like one of the reviews that we had was giving my D&D 5th edition, going through the system. You can do that. It's completely open to whatever you want to do. And I think that that's really, really cool. And I think that's, for me, is one of its biggest selling points, other than the smell, of course, is the freedom.
Absolutely.
And as a new player, or a fairly new player, who went from a binary system straight into a narrative system, I think you're probably the best person to ask that question, what do you prefer? Like, it's a no-brainer almost, isn't it?
Well, particularly for me, because my and what I am all about is story, character, and journey. And don't get me wrong, you can get that in your D20 and your traditional systems and your binary dice system. You can get all of that there, and that can work out fantastic for you. But for me, I am all about creating a scene in my head, and also sharing that with people around the table and letting the dice not only let you know the outcome of that situation, but contribute to that story just as much as any of the other players. Really, the dice in this is your extra player.
Yep.
The dice lets you know if you succeed, by how much, what else is happening. If you don't succeed, what all the impacts are. And I think that is something that is so fantastic that you just don't really get in any other system. You don't get that almost that extra player. And I think that is a key part of this system.
What other game out there can you think of where exists that people crowd around the dice rolling tray when you make a roll?
Exactly right.
There isn't.
Almost every roll in this game, everyone at the table is involved in that dice roll.
Yeah.
And no other game system does that.
And everyone around the table contributes to that dice roll.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Exactly. It's some of the best gaming moments happen when everyone sort of contributes and makes an awesome shared moment, and everyone's taking part of that. Can't explain the feeling.
It's those shared moments.
It is a
that-
shared moment.
Yeah.
Particularly when
important.
you see those triumphs and come through, and you just hear everyone get really excited, and it's a great success. And even as a GM, seeing all the players get excited about those types of wins or even failures,
It
because
just spares, man. Some of the best moments.
Exactly. Some of the best games or experiences that I've had in this system has been when I despair or I have completely failed as a character. It's made my character develop. It's made the scene so much more interesting. It's made the whole narrative turn on its head, particularly for one of my characters, but we'll probably get into a lot more of the details and examples when we get down into the nitty-gritty of the game.
Yeah.
But it's just... It really does make you feel like lost for words when you're playing this. I just love it so much.
Entire story arcs can change in one dice roll.
Yeah.
Which we've seen time and time again at the table. And again, sure, you can get that of other systems, but this system is what crams it down people's throats and makes it happen.
Yeah, agreed. The thing which I like about it the most, the thing which is the selling point for me, is how simple this system is, and yet how complex it is. That it handles people who want crunch, because there is a bit of crunch there, but it's also encouraging them more to be involved in the narrative. And I think that there are games which are certainly out there which, and I will use GURPS as an example, and I know I don't like, ratting on other systems, but GURPS is something that you need almost an entire degree on to be able to do the character generation with, pluses and minuses and whatever else. I want a system that I don't have to think a lot and I can focus on the story from a GM's perspective. As a player, I want a system that I can negotiate with the GM to get boost die, or that I can put in an environment that might give me a positive, but then the GM says, yes, but there's also a negative. And so by providing that setback die, and that is generating the story just from how the dice are applied, which I think is just something which is completely unique to any game system that I've ever seen. And that's the selling point for me, and that's why I would recommend that people have to give this game a crack, even if it's just once, to see how it all plays, and I can guarantee you will want to go out and buy it.
Find a group and jump on board.
Absolutely.
Even if it's only for one or two games.
I agree.
Just sample at the very least.
Absolutely.
And listen to our live plays as well, where we actually test out the system, because that'll also give you a good idea about how you can actually use the best of the narrative dice by talking to the GM, looking at other opportunities to gain those advantages and all those different things. And so it's a really good way of getting ideas about how it could actually be run.
Martin.
Oh, look, I don't think that there's much that I can really add to that. I mean, you're going to spend the most time with this book making your setting. That's where it's really going to come down. And I think that all of the tools that this book gives you,
it brings the tools.
It brings the tools to the table for you to be able to create this. And that's where you're going to spend your effort. And that's why I like this system, is because once you've got that set down, that's it. There's just only room for play and for those stories to emerge from that.
Okay. Next question. And I think this is probably, we're getting towards the end of this topic, because this will, no doubt, tonight we're just not going to be able to cover everything about this book. This is just sort of our initial impressions and why everyone should go out and buy this book tomorrow, as soon as they've read this.
This is
today.
Okay, today. Tomorrow. Depends on when you're listening, I guess. But anyway.
This episode is just this, start of a much, much bigger, endless amount of show topics we have.
Oh, absolutely.
There is more to come.
It's countless. Like when we were doing this, what we would talk about for the core of the show, we ended up having too many things. We reeled it back to just a few notes.
Absolutely.
We could just prattle on for hours about stuff, but there's so many topics we can just dive deep into and dedicate entire shows to, and that's our plan.
So let's just talk about one last question. So if you could name your top 2 settings about what you would want to run if when you first got this game, what are the first 2 settings that came into your head?
For me, the first thing that came to my mind was like a mecha setting, doing something really cool with the vehicle rules in this system. And I think that would be amazing. Like you could do something like Heavy Gear or Battletech. Even Neon Genesis Evangelion, I think would be amazing in this system.
Ghost in the Shell.
Ghost in the Shell.
Gundam.
Or just something uniquely your own.
Pacific Rim.
Yeah.
Macross. The mecha goes on.
And I came up with something just a few minutes ago. You talked about time travel.
Yep.
It'd be amazing.
Time traveling mechs.
Oh my gosh, I want to play.
But I think it'd be a really fun idea to maybe basically make two settings.
Yep.
One is the future, one is the past. And as you make your character, you make them from the future so they get access to all of these items and tech. But that's the only time they're ever going to get access to that, because they're going to get dropped in the past and that they can't ever get that laser gun again.
Wow.
Or
that's it.
Could you make a setting where the events, you make two settings, one in the past, one in the future, and the events of the events that carry out in the past setting affect the events in the future setting?
Yeah.
Ooh.
And I think because you can, with the flexibility of this system, I think it opens itself up really well to this. And I'd love to give it a go.
That is an entire show topic.
It is.
Just on that setting alone. Time travel in settings. My God. Right. Caitlin.
So you had to make it difficult for me by only allowing me to choose two.
Give her one.
Wow. So
That escalated quickly.
that did. And so when I first heard about Genesis and what it was trying to do, I have, more than just two in my head. But the top one for me, and you will probably notice a theme throughout this podcast, is my love for Fifth Element. And I would absolutely love to try and create something within the Genesis system about Fifth Element. It's the movie itself, while it's focused around humans in this world, they also have a really rich opportunity with all the different types of species and different events that are happening throughout the rest of the galaxy. And I think that would be really, really cool to try and explore, not to mention it's just really, really awesome. The other one that I know is probably going to be mentioned by Mike, so I'm not going to mention it here for Mike.
Then eliminates one of my choices.
That's exactly why I don't want to put you in the same position that I am in. But I would also really love to actually give a go of putting either a Dragon Age. I know that there is a Dragon Age RPG, but actually putting it in this system within that narrative dice system and allowing that type of story to flow through a Dragon Age universe would be amazing for me.
Well, you're not the first person to suggest running pre-existing RPGs in Genesis. Like I know on the Facebook page, a lot of people have recommended, have requested or want for a Shadowrun campaign using Genesis. Yeah. And there's a billion Shadowrun campaign books out there, RPG books out there already. But again, people want their favorite world in a great friendly narrative system.
Yeah. And I think that's the trick, isn't it? That narrative setting, because Shadowrun's fantastic, and don't get me wrong, I love that system. That was probably one of the first things that I sort of thought about. But there's a lot of crunch with dice and bucket loads of dice and calculating pools and all sorts of things. And I just the setting alone, like you look at what's that Netflix series that's just about to start? Bright.
I am so excited for that.
So excited.
Right? That should be a setting alone. Anyway, but
we could do it.
That's the sort of thing that I think that the people are attracted to, is that narrative feel rather than the crunch.
Injected into their favorite new world.
Yeah, and there seems to be a lot of that, like Pathfinder and I should say Shadowrun and all sorts of games that are in existence. So, yeah.
Well, following in on that vein, I am going to be a little bit cheeky because I do have another two. But in terms of Star Wars, and another thing, I am just as much as these guys a huge Star Wars fan. With Genesis, I would also love to run a Knights of the Old Republic campaign, and I'd also love to run a Sith campaign through this Genesis system
without having to worry about morality and things like that.
Not in a Sith campaign. No morality there.
So why would you use Genesis over the Star Wars books?
Well, for Knights of the Old Republic, you can definitely use this the Star Wars books for that. But I think being able to really create the elements that I love about the game, particularly because Knights of the Old Republic is not necessarily considered, well, it's not canon.
Sort of is, kind of, but not.
Not anymore.
I'm sorry, I can't say it because it just breaks my heart every time it tries to cross my lips.
Until it gets replaced, it's still canon.
Yes.
Ish. Kind of. Sort of. Maybe.
Legends.
But basically, since playing those games for as long as I can remember, I have in my head what I want to see that happen. And whilst the books are there, can provide a really good basis, Genesys allows me to really make it my own and really create that universe how I know that I believe it should be played and what can be in it and how it can work. So it's basically using the Star Wars rulebook and what's already around and using that, but also making it a personalized version of that for a system that I absolutely love and might not necessarily be recognized by how it should be recognized.
So players would be able to make characters using the more flexible talent system. So make some really unique Star Wars characters that might be more fitting for the Knights of the Old Republic time.
Exactly. And the same thing with the Sith campaign. You can still use all of the rules, the form, like anything that happens in the Star Wars RPG books, you can definitely use that, but then also bringing it into that much darker realm and that freedom to create some really badass characters that you can use and have that freedom with that story that you're normally kind of almost pigeonholed to try and do good characters and the heroes of the universe and not so much the flip side of the Empire.
Yeah.
I think that this Genesys allows you to maybe look at your traditional RPGs or your traditional games in a different light, flipping it on its end.
Mike.
Well, I've got about 2 billion ideas in my head.
No, two. Only two.
You said 2 billion.
No.
Sorry, dude. You're stuck at 2.
All right. I'll narrow it down to 2.
You can steal Martin's. He only gave us 1.
No, he was 2.
I gave
Did he give us 2?
Yeah,
Okay.
mechs,
all right.
time traveling mechs.
Oh, that's right. Time traveling Greeks.
Yeah, you can't forget
Right.
that.
Can't forget the chop. Yeah, that's 2. Fair enough.
No, I've had a unique campaign setting bouncing around in my head for quite some time. It's a cyberpunk-ish sort of setting. It's fairly unique. And I've been there was one stage me and Martin were looking at developing an entire rule system for it.
Yeah.
But then Genesys came along and I'm like, well, why bother doing that? Because we can just make it a setting for Genesys. And half the work's done for us because the core rules are there.
Yeah.
So I'm slowly fleshing that setting out. And I won't talk too much about it until it's closer to a date where I can share it around.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a very unique, very gritty cyberpunk setting that has a lot of interesting quirks to it. And that's for one. That's my ultimate sort of goal to get to in Genesys is that unique setting. But if I was to pick 2 settings that I could just pluck out of the air straight away, I think one would be Warhammer 40,000's Necromunda. Now, Warhammer 40,000 has RPG books already, Dark Heresy, Black Crusade, Rogue Trader, Death Watch, all done by FFG.
Yeah.
They're great books. They're fantastic books. But again, just like pre-existing RPGs, we all want to play our favourite setting with this great narrative dice system. Necromunda is a little self-contained Warhammer 40,000 universe within Warhammer 40,000. Yep. So it gives the players this really rich sandbox to play in, and it gives the GM this really, really rich sandbox to put the players in with never stepping out of the planet. And because the Warhammer 40,000 universe is so large and overwhelming that to a new player who's doesn't have that much Warhammer 40,000 knowledge, they go, well, what's going on? This is insane. But Necromunda, it's so easy to explain. You're a ganger or a law enforcement officer or some such similar individual living on this hyper-populated planet where people are crammed into these giant cities called hives.
Yep.
And everything else beyond that is just chemical wastelands. Life is rank, life is horrid. It's ruled by several houses, several sort of Game of Thrones-esque houses which control and manipulate the planet. And each house has their own infrastructure. They all rely and depend on each other, but they're all at proxy war with each other. So there's so much that you can do as a GM, and the players have unlimited scope when it comes to creating characters. With Warhammer 40,000, you can have demons, you can have aliens, you can have Judge Dredd style enforcers, you can have it's mind-boggling how much you can have lurking around every single corner. And that's just one slither of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And that's my love for Necromunda has been rekindled with the recent re-release of Necromunda from Games Workshop. And as soon as I saw it, never even occurred to me how great that would be as a standalone RPG. And I think Genesys would be fantastic for it. And half the work's done. The Genesys has the core rules. Necromunda has the fluff. All it needs now is to be tied together. And that's not hard to do at all. And I'm even thinking about running a one-shot or over a couple of sessions for the Necromunda campaign just to give everyone a bit of a sense of the world and what Genesys can do with something as grim dark as Warhammer 40,000. Because there's one thing I like to do in a role-playing game, that's I like to induce horror into my game. So
look, I think that there's something in what you just said there is that effectively everything old has become new again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because all that you need is just the fluff from your favourite game or your favourite setting that, has been sitting on your bookshelf for however long. And now you've got this great new system where you don't have to do a lot of work.
Nope.
Or even if you do want to go to the next stage and do a lot of work, you can. Using a setting which really promotes that storytelling.
Yep.
So I agree 100%.
And for the second one, so a little bit of an oddball, and that would be Horizon Zero Dawn, based on the PlayStation 4 game.
I have never seen that until you sent me the trailer for that the other day. I'd never even heard of it, and
That is
I
such
had
a
a PlayStation 4.
Yeah.
So sad.
Horizon
clearly.
Zero Dawn is amazing. The story is just changed my life.
I don't often get a PlayStation game or any PC game that's not a multiplayer game and just play it non-stop. And I did a Horizon Zero Dawn. I sat down every afternoon and played and played and played. Not so much for the action, but just for the rich storytelling and the rich world that everything this entire game is set in. And I just immediately wanted to live in that world via an RPG like the Narrative Dice.
Yeah.
And I think Genesys would be perfect for it because there's so much rich social interaction with these people who live a very tribal life, and the hunting and hunting robotic dinosaurs and other monsters. How awesome is that? It's almost as good as time traveling mechs. Almost as good. And
you cross them over.
indeed,
Yes, the time traveling mechs come back in time into the Hero Zero Dawn universe.
That's
So you can
call it
just
Hero
see,
Dawn.
you can just see how excited I am that all of my words just came out completely wrong.
Mech Dawn.
Mech Dawn, that's the name of it. Mechs come back in time and then start fighting the giant robots that are in Horizon Zero Dawn, and then you have like some kind of ridiculous Power Ranger type scenario, and it's going to be amazing.
Oh, and then you have sort of like your time traveling Dino Hunters. Wasn't there? There was a role playing game that was called Dino Hunters or something like that. And so you have like your mech dinos against your real fleshy dinos, and now we're just getting a little bit crazy. But I digress.
That sounds amazing. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I want to start playing right now.
that does sound amazing. But to cut to the short, Horizon Zero Dawn is a rich new lore setting. It's unexplored except for what's in the game. So it's just untapped resources for a GM and players. And it also allows players and the GM to focus on a not so often touched thing of survival. It's usually the last skill anyone ever considers putting ranks into when they're playing a game is survival. But having that survival, animal handling, all those sort of outdoorsy skills can be put into this sci-fi setting, which is quite unique.
Absolutely. My top two, and I'll make this very, very quick, is that I love Shadowrun. We've already mentioned that. Would love to run a setting, would love to run a game in that setting. But the one that sort of jumped at me, and I have no idea why, but Transformers. I know that it goes down to the whole mech thing, and maybe that's a bit of a theme. I don't know.
Different though.
But just the whole being able to play a Transformer, that would be absolutely amazing. I'd love to try to do that.
Would it be Michael Bay Transformers or old school Transformers?
Get out.
Old school.
Old school, my friend. Old school.
No, if you say Michael Bay, I'll tell you. With explosions behind you.
which we don't look at.
No, exactly.
Never.
So, no, definitely old school 80s cartoons, Transformers for me. Thanks very much.
That's so good. Would you let the players
robots
to
in
create
disguise.
their like disguise?
Yes.
That'd be great.
Yes, I think. And the other thing that I would love to do, because I've never actually been able to do it properly, and I own probably a good 10 different versions of superhero games, I would love to run a supers game in this system.
Yeah.
There would be a lot of work based on like some of the stuff that they've got in the book, and I know we'll probably get onto this a little bit later on, but I think that would be amazing to run like a Marvel Cinematic Universe type scenario in using this system or any sort of supers. I think that it lends itself to that of, doing crazy stunts I just can't wait to do that sort of thing. So they're probably mine too. But I'm also a big fan of Pathfinder, and yes, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to have 3. Pathfinder, I love the setting. I'm not a fan of the system,
Setting's great. Yeah,
but
Pathfinder's fantastic.
because I think that I've played way too much of it. But definitely, I would love to run a game based in Galarian, because I think that it's a really rich world with a lot of scope and so many player resources for it. It's not funny, but set it under a Genesis setting.
We know. Speaking of D&D style narratives, I would love to do Spelljammer in Genesis.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
I love the whole. I've never had a chance to play a Spelljammer game because it was before my time, but I stumbled across it a few years ago and just fell in love with that.
It's amazing.
That space opera, whales in space, sailing ships in space aesthetic, and it's so cool and unique. And that would be a great system for Genesis.
Yeah.
So good.
Absolutely.
Piloting your spaceship through space.
And it's all there.
Yeah, whilst fighting space orcs.
I know that a number of people that I've seen online, they're talking about doing Starfinder under Genesis. It's interesting, considering Starfinder's a new sort of system. But anyway.
Again, it's that thing. People love the setting, don't necessarily love the crunch.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's just the way they want to be, which is fine.
That's right.
Speaking of settings, though, it's worth mentioning my friend Josh Bruce of Inkbite Games, who did our logo of all people. He is setting up a Genesis game setting up a Genesis game for Stars of Outnumber, which is another pre-existing RPG, which has heavy, crunchy rules, but is using the best parts of Genesis with the best parts of Stars of Outnumber.
Nice.
So that should be very interesting for anyone who's familiar with Stars of Outnumber. So I'm sure we'll keep everyone up to date with what's going on with that.
Absolutely.
So it's a bit of a guinea pig for us.
Yeah.
in a way.
And so when we're talking about mixing settings, just had an idea that actually it's not just an idea that I've just had. We've been talking about this for a while, but that's a side note.
Excited to do it.
Is setting blenders. One of the things.
Setting blender, yeah.
What is a setting blender? Thanks. I'm
curious.
glad you asked. So a setting blender is where we each come up with an idea for a setting, and then during the episode, we blend it all together to come up with a single entity, which we can then put into play.
Something truly unique.
Indeed.
So basically, what will happen is we'll get those ingredients. There's 4 blended ingredients of setting ideas during the course episode. All 4 of us will sit together and basically spitball and generate a setting that's unique and cool for you to play in Genesis.
And
Absolutely.
go through the steps of how we put that into action.
Exactly right. So that'll be coming up in a couple of episodes' time, I would suggest. I'm sure as we sort of develop our own systems over time, that we will no doubt try to make those available online to whoever wants to take a look, because I'm sure that they'll be more than interested. And it also gives us an opportunity to get some feedback and consider other things as well. So definitely. But generally speaking, any sort of last things that you'd like to discuss about the game, or selling points, or why people need to go out and buy this now?
Excitement level over 9,000.
Dragon Ball Z, there's another game.
Stop it.
Nice. Excellent. All right. Well, all that I can suggest is, give it a listen. You can listen to us on the via iTunes or your favourite browsing, whatever you want to call it, to listen to the podcast or our example live play. It was a lot of fun doing it. We've done part 1. It's now available, but part 2 will be available shortly.
On its way.
You can take a listen to that. And after you've had a bit of a listen to that, if you really like what you're listening to, go out there, go and grab the book. It's not all that expensive. You'll love it. You will not regret it. And so for our last section, now that we've discussed pretty much everything there is to go ahead with going out and buying that book, so we've got a couple of questions that have come across our Facebook feed that we'd like to now tackle. And we're going to call it Behind the Screens. Behind the Screens. And so welcome to Behind the Screens, which will be dealing with answering a couple of questions that you've presented to us. You can get those questions to us either on the Facebooks or you can send it through to us on info@thedicebellpodcast.com. Let's start with the first question. So congratulations to Alexander Graham. You are the first person who's going to have a question answered on our fine little podcast.
That's a prestigious thing right there.
There you go.
First question.
There First ever question.
Put that on your resume.
Yep.
Indeed.
I want to see that underneath your Facebook page.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Tattoo on his
Yes.
back.
Yes.
It's certainly going to give him some street cred. Anyway, moving along. All right, so his question is a question for your show. Vehicles. I understand things are a little different from Star Wars. What can we expect to see? Do vehicle encounters feel any different when you play them?
Well, one of the first things I did when I got the book was go over the vehicle section because I've always felt, to be honest, that the vehicle rules in the Star Wars version of this game have been a little bit awkward in places. Mm-hmm. So I was curious to see how they fix that, if at all, for Genesis. Mm. And sure enough, they have done a bit of a rework to the rules. If you're familiar with them already, they're more or less the same. But they have gone through and cleaned them up significantly. There is just bits and pieces that didn't really work or a little bit clunky before, and they're gone. Just streamlined it and made it an overall better system for vehicles. I won't go into details of what they are because it's quite a few, but you'll find a good description of the changes in Sneaky Vehicle Changes blog post on the Facebook page that outlines what exactly has changed. But in terms of how it has changed vehicles, like if it changes vehicle combat, I think it does. I think it changes it for the better, and I believe most players, I know we've talked about it, us as the podcast have talked about bringing those rules into Star Wars, just because they are streamlined and a little bit better, and some of the finicky things are gone. Yeah. So I think overall it is a bit of an improvement.
Absolutely. I think once we get a chance to get it on the table, because it's only been sort of like a week, so we haven't really had a chance, but I think that some of those changes are going to be quite significant, but it will make combat a little bit better. I think. Yeah.
The biggest thing is the freeing up of the having to fly or maneuver as the pilot to go anywhere. So that's an automatic thing now. So the pilot character is not stuck sacrificing one maneuver every turn in actively moving the vehicle from point A to point B.
So there's a better feel for every character involved.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot more fluid. So it should be interesting. And it's all theory craft at the moment because as GM Hooley said, we haven't actually got on the table with it.
No, that's exactly right. But I think that one of the things that we'll get the opportunity to try it out, no doubt. This will get mentioned a lot on the podcast. Dragon Squadron, which is our Star Wars game, which is all fighter-based squadron. No doubt we will get to test those vehicle rules a little bit more as we progress, and I think that we'll probably give some feedback as we go on the podcast with what we're finding that we're adopting with Star Wars and what we're leaving behind. And obviously, when we start playing our own Genesis systems, that we'll be able to see how that all plays out.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So yeah, probably a bit of an early question for us, but we may revisit that at a later stage. Our second question for tonight comes from Chris Denyer. I think that's how you pronounce it. Hi, Chris. So magic is a hot topic. Some love it, some hate it, and think it's too harsh. What do you think?
I've had a bit of a look at this. I think that I don't think it's too harsh. I think what they've done is they've made the system for magic. It's more of a general tool that can replace anything that you could do normally. So it's a very broad and all-encompassing tool. You're never going to get quite the same results that someone that's specialized in this is going to get otherwise.
Yeah.
But you're going to be able to do everything.
When you say someone who's specialised, you mean, for example?
Like a professional tracker is going to be able to track something a lot better than you using the magic user. Like straight off the bat, because he's sunk a lot more into this.
Yeah.
Which is an important thing, because you don't want to
overshadow.
Exactly. Which is a very fine balancing point when it comes to RPGs.
Especially when the magic system is so flexible that you can basically do whatever you dream of. You don't want it to become the magic user is God.
The magic user show and his friends.
Whilst he can do everything, he needs to try a bit harder at it. Yeah. And I think that's, you can't really draw a direct comparison in that way because it's so flexible.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that goes to put it into a bit of a reflection with Star Wars as well, is that you've got Force users versus normal people. And, is there a balance there? And I think that they've got a fine balance between the two of them. So I think that, to bringing magic to be the equivalent of, using skills and whatever else, I think that's quite a nice balancing act, so that there is that evenness between the two races.
Well, it's worth pointing out.
Two types.
It's worth pointing out, like a magic user in D&D, for example, their spells and magic is limited. Once they use it, it's gone. So the stuff in D&D in similar games is it's more powerful and more explosive on the table, but that's because it's limited.
Yeah.
The magic by default in Genesis isn't.
That's right.
It needs to be a little bit softer.
I mean, there's a strain limiter, but it's a lot softer.
A lot more fluid than hard caps like a lot of other games have when it comes to magic.
Because you can cast magic every single round effectively, as opposed to, you have to... They call it a system where you've got only so many spells that you're allowed to have. Within a certain time frame, within a day or whatever else, or per encounter. But certainly with this, they have to. I agree with Mike that they've had to tone it down just a little bit to enable it to be used at any stage.
But in saying that, Martin, what would a powerful magic user who's focused a lot of XP into their magic use? What do you think, that they're a powerful magic user then?
I think that they're going to be very powerful.
How so?
Well, they've only had to focus on one skill.
Right, yep.
And that's going to make their dice pool really nice to get all of those advantages and upgrade their, add effects to their spells.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's one thing worth pointing out. People are saying that, a straight attack with magic isn't as powerful as someone attacking with a rifle. Yeah, default magic attack isn't as powerful as attacking with a rifle, but it has the flexibility and the chance to be far more powerful than a rifle once that spell user has gone to a point where it makes sense that their magic is more powerful than a weapon.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people got to keep in mind, that it does take XP investment to bring yourself up to that high level magic user who is a badass with magic.
The other thing I think you need to take into consideration as well is that we are used to magic systems where it's just you shoot it off and it has an effect. That's what it is. Yeah. With this, it's a case of you can shoot it off, and yes, you may be able to activate certain other effects, but instead it might suit the story better that something extra cool happens, which isn't sort of in the rules. that you can use your advantages for, or triumphs, or whatever else. And that's what's exciting about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love that they've added utility spells to the game, which are just an easy check to do. And it's just like your cantrip from traditional games.
Yeah.
That it's whatever you want.
The limitation is your imagination. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. And if you want to do something more bombastic, the GM just goes, all right, add some setback dice or add some difficulty to it. Simple as that.
Yeah.
And let's not mention, I think another thing that everyone sort of, not everyone, but a lot of people might be overlooking is how awesome narratively magic is now. If I'm casting as magic power and I'm saying doing a lightning bolt, I successfully hit my enemy, but I've rolled a despair in it. The GM has an amazing thing at his disposal there.
Yeah.
What does that despair do? The static discharge zaps all of your friends around you.
Yeah.
There's so much you do. Magic just opens this crazy realm of possibilities when it comes to using threats and advantages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. And I think people got to factor that in as well, how much that's going to change how magic's done in this game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's pretty much covered magic. I mean, again, once we get it on the table, it's going to we're going to have a lot better idea.
Absolutely.
And I can't wait.
Look, I think it's also going to be a lot more expansive once additional books come out, because they've mentioned that there's some talents that there aren't a lot of magic-related talents which are in the book. And I think that once we get the likes of, I mean, let's face it, there will probably be a rune-bound book,
Of course.
which and other supplemental books that will deal with magic, because it is such an integral part of storytelling, whether it be fantasy or even modern fantasy,
Or even sci-fi these
or
days.
sci-fi.
Like-
Exactly right. So I think that those things will come about.
What's it
All right, and so our final question for tonight is from Donald William, who says, "What would you port to Star Wars and why?"
The vehicle rules.
I think at this stage, without playing a whole lot of, well, not playing much Genesis at all, really, apart from the live play, which was a fantasy setting.
Yep.
I think so far the biggest single carry across the Star Wars is what we mentioned before,
Yep.
and that's vehicles.
Yeah.
And it's worth mentioning as well. Like we've already implemented using vigilance for opposing deception in our Star Wars games because it gives vigilance a chance to be used outside of initiative checks.
And the book does go into a bit of detail about different uses for skills and things like that. So that's something as well to add and enhance your Star Wars games if that's what you want to do.
Absolutely. The thing which I think that would port across quite well is the social encounter stuff.
Absolutely.
Because that is something which is key, especially if you're playing in a campaign which is set sort of more for episode 1, episode 2, where there's a lot more political sort of intrigue that's going on. But I mean, even then, your standard Star Wars campaign is going to have some sort of politicalness to it. And it just enables that to be utilised more, I think, because those rules are in 1 or 2 supplements and they're spread out, where this is all in the one thing. So I know that I'll definitely be bringing those into the game.
Curious to know, have you done a comparison between the two, the Star Wars version of the social encounter rules and the Genesis version?
I have looked at it a little bit. The difference is that, I mean, there is obviously Scathing Tirade, which is still a fairly much a core thing for the book, but it smooths out a lot of how to use coercion, how to use charm and things like that. Not only just from the skill descriptions, but also from just how to handle those interactions and that's what I'll be bringing in anyway. So.
Perfect. Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the show.
That's a wrap.
So next episode, we are going to just tackle something which is, it may seem really small, but it's quite huge, and that's the narrative dice system itself. Mm-hmm. What runs the core of Genesis, how it can be used. We'll go through and explain all of the dice, how that all works, as well as how you can use the dice to make your games that much better, and how to apply the mixes between advantages and threats and triumphs and despairs and things like that to run your game better.
Basically bring some real world knowledge to the dice, because there's a whole lot of know-how of those dice which the rules just can't express, and bringing a bit of experience from our hours of play, I think could be pretty valuable.
Absolutely, I agree. Awesome. Well, thanks very much, guys, for coming and joining us this fine evening, day, depending on when you're listening to the podcast. Let us know. Send us some feedback, whether it be via Twitter, Facebook, or any of our other social media outlets. Or, as I mentioned before, you can visit us on the web at www.thedicepoolpodcast.com. And you can also send us emails at info@thedicepoolpodcast.com. I'm GM Hooley.
I'm GM Huz.
I'm GM Flano.
I'm GM Caitlin.
And we are the Dice Pool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Pool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains a property of the Dice Pool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesys Role Playing Game, the Genesys logo, content and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.
I like my fish raw, really.
Yes! That's amazing.
It'll just keep rolling, and people will close it off. But someone's going to
Somebody's going to go and go, yes. Could you do something just like off the cuff, like, what are you still doing here? Go,
Yeah.
What are you still doing here, precious? The podcast is over.
Yes!
I have so much love for that.
oh, let's go. That's a wrap.